The conference chamber stretched wide enough to hold a city block. Commander Tae-yoon stood at the back of the human delegation, his dress uniform pressed sharp and clean, watching the alien delegates file into their seats. Some floated, others walked on legs he could not count. A few existed as clouds of luminous gas inside containment fields. This was the Galactic Council, and today they would decide humanity's fate. Ambassador Hana Lee stood at the podium in the center of the vast room. She was a small woman, but her voice carried clearly through the translation systems that hummed in everyone's ears. She had been speaking for 20 minutes about Earth's achievements, its culture, its contributions to science. Tae-yoon could see the boredom on the alien faces. Well, on the ones that had faces. And so, Hana concluded, humanity formally requests full membership in the Galactic Council. The chamber filled with sounds, clicks, whistles, electronic pulses. The translation system rendered it all as polite applause. But Tae-yoon had been around aliens long enough to know the difference between genuine and fake. This was very fake. Council Overseer Vrexthal rose from his seat. He was a being of living crystal, light refracting through his body in rainbow patterns. Beautiful and cold, he had lived for 3,000 years and governed a civilization that had mastered faster than light travel before humans discovered fire. The Council thanks Earth for its application, Vrexthal said. His voice sounded like wind chimes. However, we have concerns about humanity's military capabilities. You claim extensive combat experience, yet your technology is primitive. Your vessels lack proper shielding. Your weapons are chemical propellants. Please help us understand how you survived so long. Hana's jaw tightened. Tae-yoon saw it from across the room. She had expected this question. Our history speaks for itself, Overseer. Humanity has fought and survived thousands of conflicts. We have detailed records of tactics, strategies, and doctrines spanning 10,000 years of continuous warfare. A delegate from the Serpentis cluster made a sound like rattling stones. The translator called it laughter. Warfare? Against whom? Your own species? Yes, Hana said simply. The chamber erupted. More laughter, more strange sounds. A delegate shaped like a floating jellyfish pulsed with colors that the translator interpreted as amusement. Vrexthal raised a crystalline hand for silence. Ambassador, surely you understand our skepticism. Your species fought itself? With primitive weapons? And you consider this valuable military experience? Our wars were real, Tae-yoon said, stepping forward before he could stop himself. Every alien eye turned toward him. Hana shot him a warning look, but he continued. We have documentation, video recordings, detailed after-action reports, battle plans and tactical analyses. Another delegate spoke up, this one a floating sphere of metal covered in sensors. We have reviewed your historical database, Commander Tae-yoon. The Council's Cultural Committee found it most entertaining. Your World War II was particularly dramatic. The Battle of Stalingrad could be adapted into a fine theatrical production. Tae-yoon felt heat rising in his chest. Those were real people who died. Real battles. Of course, the sphere said dismissively. But you must understand our perspective. Wars where soldiers carry chemical slug throwers and die from metal fragments, where victory depends on who has more bodies to throw at the enemy. This is not warfare. This is mythology. Cautionary tales for children. Vrexthal consulted a holographic display. The committee has cataloged humanity's military history under cultural fiction and historical drama. It makes for fascinating study, but it hardly qualifies you for council membership. Real warfare requires psionic coordination, quantum entanglement communication, displacement weapons. Not. He gestured vaguely. Bullets and bombs. Hana looked like she wanted to argue, but Tae-yoon could see defeat in her eyes. They had known this would be difficult, but they had not expected to be called liars. Before anyone could speak again, alarms shrieked through the chamber. Red lights flashed along the walls. Vrexthal's crystalline body shifted from blue to sharp crimson. Emergency broadcast from Helios 7th, a mechanical voice announced. Vex swarm detected, multiple hive ships emerging from dark space. Colony under attack, civilian casualties mounting. The chamber fell silent. Then chaos erupted as delegates shouted over each other, demanding information, calling for fleet deployments. Taiyun knew the name, the Vex Swarm. A hive mind species of insectoid creatures that had terrorized the galaxy 500 years ago, before being driven to extinction. Or so everyone thought. Vrexthal brought order with a pulse of light from his body. The Council fleet will deploy immediately. All member species will contribute ships and personnel. He turned to Hana. Earth may contribute logistic support. Transport vessels, medical supplies, nothing more. Our destroyers are ready, Taiyun said. We have 3 ships in this system and 20 more within a week's travel. Let us fight. No. Vrexthal's voice was final. This requires professional military forces, Commander. Forces trained in real combat, not theatrical reenactments. You will transport supplies and that is all. Consider it an honor that we trust you with even that much. The delegates filed out, rushing to their commands. Hana and Taiyun stood alone in the emptying chamber. They think we're telling stories, Hana said quietly. I know. They put our wars in the fiction section of their database. I know. Hana turned to him. Can we actually fight these things? The Vex? Taiyun thought about the files he had read on the Vex swarm. Overwhelming numbers, suicide tactics, no regard for individual life, adaptable and merciless. And he thought about human history. About desperate stands and impossible victories. About soldiers who held positions against overwhelming odds because surrender was not an option. About the tactics that civilized species called barbaric. Yes, he said. We can fight them. Better than anyone here. They won't let us. Not officially. Taiyun looked at the empty chamber, at the seat where Vrexthal had sat in judgment of humanity. But we're going to be there, transporting supplies. And supplies need to be defended. Hana understood. A small smile crossed her face. That would be unauthorized combat. That would be following the human doctrine, Taiyun corrected. Adapt, overcome, win. He straightened his uniform. They think we're myths, Ambassador. They think our wars were stories we made up to sound impressive. They filed our history under fiction. And fiction can't bleed. Fiction can't win battles. He headed for the exit. But we can, and we will. Then maybe they'll move us to the history section where we belong. As they left the chamber, neither of them saw Vrexthal watching from a private balcony above. The crystalline being had not left after all. He stared at the 2 humans and wondered if perhaps the Council had made an error in judgment. On the edges of Council space, the Vex swarm descended on Helios VII like a plague, and humanity prepared to show the galaxy that their stories were scars, written in blood and fire across 10,000 years of survival. The fiction was about to become very, very real. Captain Jinquan watched the view screen as the Indomitable dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Helios 7 hung in the darkness ahead, a brown and green marble wrapped in smoke. Even from orbit, he could see the fires. Sir, I'm reading 3 Vex hive ships in low orbit, his sensor officer reported. Dozens of smaller craft making surface runs. Council fleet is engaged at Grid 77 Alpha. Jin studied the tactical display. The Council fleet had numbers and firepower. Their massive dreadnoughts throwing beams of coherent energy that could crack planets. But the Vex ships moved like insects, darting and weaving, never staying still long enough for the big guns to track them properly. Orders are still to hold position and await supply distribution assignments, his executive officer said. Jin clenched his jaw. 3 million civilians down there. 3 million people burning while his ship sat idle because the Council thought humans could only drive trucks. Sir, encrypted message from Commander Taiyun. Jin took the datapad and read the short message. 5 words. Take your ships off the leash. He smiled. All crew to battle stations, Jin ordered. Bring weapons online. Plot an intercept course for the nearest Vex ship. Sir, that's not our assigned... I know what it's not, Jin said. I'm telling you what it is. We have weapons and there's an enemy. Simple math. The Indomitable broke formation, her human crew rushing to stations they had trained for but never used in actual combat. Behind her, 2 frigates, the Defiant and Resolute, matched her course. On the surface of Helios 7th, Lieutenant Una Park crouched behind a ruined wall and counted the enemy. 20 Vex warriors visible, probably 40 more in the surrounding buildings. Each one was 2 meters of chitinous armor and razor claws, moving with insect precision. "This wasn't supposed to be our mission," Private Bin Choi whispered beside her. He was young, barely 20, and this was his first real combat. His hands shook as he gripped his rifle. "Plans change," Una said calmly. She had done this before, in training simulations that the Council would call fictional, but she had also studied every urban combat engagement in human history. Stalingrad, Fallujah, Seoul. She knew how to fight in cities. "Council forces are pulling back." Sergeant Yoon Na reported over the radio. She was 2 blocks away with the medical team. "Their commanders say the Vex tactics are uncivilized. They're requesting permission to retreat." Una almost laughed. Uncivilized. As if war had rules that everyone agreed to follow. "What about the civilians?" Bin asked. 300 trapped in the shelter beneath the industrial complex, Una said. "Council forces were supposed to evacuate them. Now they're leaving." She made a decision then. The kind of decision that human commanders had made for thousands of years. The kind that got you court-martialed or made you a hero, depending on how it turned out. All units were moving in. Standard sweep and clear. "Bin, you're with me." "Wuhan, I need you to booby-trap our fallback routes." Specialist Wuhan's voice came back cheerful.
"Finally."
I was getting bored. He was the demolitions expert, a man who could turn household items into explosives. The Council had reviewed his file and called it creatively destructive fiction. They moved through the ruined city like ghosts. The Council forces fought in the open, standing in formation with their energy shields glowing, firing precisely coordinated volleys. Beautiful. Organized. Useless against an enemy that didn't care about formation or shields. Yuna's team used doorways and shadows. They moved low and fast. When they encountered Vex warriors, they hit them from 3 directions at once with simple bullets that the Vex's electronic warfare couldn't jam. Chemical propellant weapons. Primitive, effective. Above the planet, Jin brought his ship screaming down into the atmosphere. The Council fleet commander was shouting over all frequencies. "Human vessel Indomitable, you are ordered to return to formation. This is not your assigned mission." "Signal breaking up, sir," Jin's communication officer reported, not bothering to hide her smile. "Can't quite make out what they're saying." The Indomitable was built for atmosphere. Human ships were designed to fight in space and air, because humanity had learned long ago that battles didn't stay in neat categories. She roared over the industrial sector, her point defense cannons ripping into Vex flyers. "Target the hive ship's landing struts," Jin ordered. "Make it think about leaving." Missiles streaked from the destroyer's tubes. Primitive solid fuel rockets that flew straight and simple. The Vex hive ship's defensive systems were designed to intercept sophisticated smart weapons with complex flight paths. They didn't know what to do with dumb rockets that just flew straight. The missiles hit home. The hive ship shuddered. On the ground, Yuna's team reached the civilian shelter. The entrance was blocked by 6 Vex warriors. Behind them, she could hear the screams of the trapped people inside. "Wuhan, I need that entrance open. Give me 30 seconds. They didn't have 30 seconds. The Vex had spotted them. Bin raised his rifle with shaking hands. "Aim for the joints," Una said calmly. "Armor's thinner there." Short bursts, breathe. They opened fire. The Council forces would have called it barbaric. Humans and their bullet weapons making noise and smoke so uncivilized. But bullets didn't care about civilization. They punched through chitin and dropped Vex warriors like broken toys. Bin's rifle clicked empty. A Vex warrior charged him. He fumbled for a new magazine, too slow, the creature almost on him. Then Sergeant Yoon Na appeared from nowhere, driving a combat knife into the joint between the Vex's head and thorax. Not sophisticated. Not civilized. Absolutely deadly. The shelter entrance exploded as Wuhan's charges detonated. Controlled. Precise. The door blew inward, but the shelter itself held. "Get them out," Una ordered. "Move, move, move!" Civilians poured out. Aliens of a dozen species. They looked at the human soldiers with confusion and hope. One of them, a crystalline being like Rexthal, stared at Bin's primitive rifle. "You're the humans," it said. "The ones with the fictional military history." Bin was too busy reloading to answer. Above them, the Indomitable took a hit from the Vex hive ship. Alarms screamed through the bridge. Jin gritted his teeth as his ship shook. Shields at 40%, his officer reported. Keep firing. All batteries. The Council fleet had pulled back to regroup. Their casualties were mounting because they fought by the rules. They waited for clear firing solutions. They maintained formation. They followed doctrine. Jin followed human doctrine. Hit them until they stopped moving, then hit them some more. His cannons hammered the hive ship. The Vex started to pull back, rising toward orbit. They had never faced an enemy that actually wanted to close to knife-fighting range. Sir, Council Command is demanding we cease fire, his communications officer said. Tell them we're experiencing technical difficulties, Jin said. All systems malfunctioning. Can't receive transmissions. Tragic. By the time the Council fleet reformed, Yuna's team had evacuated 200 civilians. Wuhan had turned 6 city blocks into a maze of traps that claimed dozens of Vex warriors. Bin had stopped shaking and started fighting like he'd been born to it. And in orbit, the Indomitable limped back to the fleet with scorch marks along her hull and her ammunition stores empty. The Council fleet commander opened a channel. Jin expected a reprimand. Instead, the alien commander just stared at him for a long moment. Where did you learn to fight like that? It asked. Jin thought about answering. About explaining 10,000 years of human warfare. About describing every desperate battle humanity had ever fought. But he was tired and his ship was damaged and there were still civilians dying below. We read about it in a book, he said, and cut the channel. In the council chamber back on Sanctum Prime, Vrexthal watched the battle feeds. He watched humans fighting with primitive weapons and winning. He watched tactics that should not work actually working. He watched 300 civilians alive because humans had broken orders and done the right thing. He pulled up humanity's military history file, filed under cultural fiction and historical drama. Maybe, he thought, it was time to move it. The Indomitable hung in low orbit, her hull still hot from atmospheric entry. Captain Jin Quan stood on the bridge reviewing damage reports when the Council's emergency transmission came through. All ships. Vex forces have concentrated at the colony's eastern sector. Council forces will advance in formation Delta 7. Human vessels will maintain support position. Jin looked at his tactical officer. What's in the eastern sector? Residential zone. 2 million civilians. The Vex have surrounded the entire area. Jin pulled up the tactical map. The Council's formation Delta 7 was a standard frontal assault with ships providing orbital support. It would work against an enemy that fought in formations. The Vex didn't. They would scatter, regroup, and hit the civilians while the Council forces were still organizing their attack pattern. Get me Commander Tae-Yoon, Jin said. 5 minutes later, Tae-Yoon's face appeared on screen. He was planetside now, coordinating human ground forces. Behind him, Jin could see smoke and hear weapons fire. Captain, Tae-Yoon said, the Council's planning a frontal assault on the eastern sector. It won't work, I know. I've read the battle plan. It's very proper, very organized. It will get everyone killed. Tae-Yoon looked tired. What do you propose? Jin highlighted areas on the map. We hit them from 4 directions at once. Fast strike teams, no formations. Create chaos. Make them react instead of act. Standard search and destroy. That's not Council doctrine. No, Jin agreed. It's human doctrine. It's what we've been doing for 10,000 years. It worked in every war we ever fought against ourselves. Tae-Yoon was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. Do it. I'll coordinate ground forces. And Captain? Don't ask permission. Just do it. Lieutenant Yuna Park gathered her team in the ruins of what used to be a shopping center. 20 soldiers, all human. All carrying those primitive chemical rifles the Council found so amusing. We're going into the residential zone, she told them. 2 million civilians trapped. The Vex are using them as hostages, Council forces. Sergeant Yoon Na asked. Forming up for a frontal assault in about 2 hours. By then the civilians will be dead. Private Bin Choi checked his rifle. His hands didn't shake anymore. What's the plan? We're going in now. Small teams. Wuhan will breach the Vex perimeter with charges. We extract as many civilians as we can before the Council even starts their attack. One of the soldiers raised a hand. Ma'am, the Council specifically ordered us to wait. Yuna looked at each of them. I'm going. Anyone who wants to follow can. Anyone who wants to wait for orders is welcome to stay here. Nobody stayed. They moved through the city like water flowing around rocks. The Council forces would have marched straight up the main road. Yuna's teams used sewers, buildings, rooftops. They appeared behind Vex positions, hit hard, and vanished before the enemy could respond. Specialist Wu Han was having the time of his life. He used the colony's own infrastructure against the Vex, turning gas lines into bombs, collapsing buildings onto enemy positions, creating explosions that the Vex never saw coming. "This is what you humans do?" asked an alien observer embedded with Yuna's team. It was a floating sphere covered in sensors. "This is not warfare. This is chaos." "Yes," Yuna said simply, dropping another Vex warrior with 3 shots to the joints. The sphere watched as Bin's squad cleared a building. They didn't line up and fire in organized volleys. They kicked in doors, threw in grenades, and shot anything that moved. It was brutal. It was messy. It was incredibly effective. "Your tactics don't follow any recognized pattern," the sphere said. Sergeant Yun Na laughed as she bandaged a wounded civilian. "That's the point. If we're predictable, we're dead. We learned that the hard way." Above them, the Indomitable and her sister ships made their own chaos. Jin brought his destroyer down into the atmosphere again, ignoring the Council commander's increasingly angry transmissions. "Human vessels, you are breaking formation. Return to position immediately." Jin's communications officer looked at him. He nodded. "Sorry, Council Command, having trouble with our engines. Can't seem to maintain altitude." "Oh no, we're falling toward the Vex positions." "How tragic." The Indomitable roared over the residential zone, her cannons firing not at enemy positions but at the buildings around them. Jin wasn't trying to kill Vex warriors. He was creating barriers, cutting off their retreat routes, forcing them into kill zones where Yuna's teams waited. A Council observer ship watched all this with growing amazement. "They're coordinating without quantum communication." "How is that possible?" The answer was simple: practice. Human forces had been doing this for centuries. Radio coordination, pre-planned signals, most importantly, trusting your people to make decisions without asking permission first. Bin's squad reached a shelter holding 500 civilians. The entrance was guarded by a dozen Vex warriors. Standard Council doctrine would call for suppressing fire from a distance, then a coordinated advance. Bin didn't have time for that. "Wuhan, can you blow that wall?" He pointed to a weak spot in the structure. "Already rigged." "Say when." When the wall exploded inward. Bin's squad poured through the breach while the Vex were still reacting. Close quarters combat. No room for fancy energy weapons or shields. Just humans with rifles and knives, fighting like their ancestors had fought in 1,000 desperate battles. It was over in 30 seconds. The civilians were free. One of them was another crystalline being. It looked at Bin with what might have been awe. "You fight like demons." "No," Bin said, reloading his rifle. "We fight like humans. There's a difference." By the time the Council forces finally began their organized advance, Yuna's teams had evacuated 40,000 civilians. They had done it with primitive weapons and tactics that the galaxy called fictional. They had done it by ignoring every rule of civilized warfare. Most importantly, they had done it in 2 hours. The Council's advance would have taken 6. Commander Tai Yun watched it all from a command post that used to be a warehouse. Around him, Council officers stared at tactical displays showing impossible things. Small human teams moving faster than should be possible, coordinating without proper communication systems, winning battles they should be losing. One of the Council officers turned to him. "Commander, I don't understand. Your forces have no psionic abilities, no quantum armor, no displacement weapons. By all metrics, you should be losing." Tae-Yoon thought about how to explain 10,000 years of human warfare to someone who had only fought in neat, organized battles. "We lose soldiers," he said finally. "We lose equipment. We take casualties. But we don't lose battles. Not when it matters, but how? Because we've been fighting longer than anyone else. We've made every mistake possible. We've died in every way imaginable. Every tactic you see us using, we learned it by bleeding." He looked at the officer. "You filed our military history under fiction. That was your first mistake. Those weren't stories. Those were lessons. And we paid for everyone in blood." The Council officer was quiet for a long time. On the screen, they watched Yuna's team breach, another Vex position using tactics from a battle, fought 300 years ago on Earth. The tactics worked perfectly because humans had been refining them for centuries. "The Council was wrong about you," the officer said. "Finally." "Yes," Tae-Yoon agreed. But you're learning. The question is whether you'll learn fast enough. In orbit, the Vex hive ships began to pull back. They had come expecting easy prey, soft, civilized species that fought by rules. Instead, they had found humans. Species that fought dirty, thought tactically, and never ever gave up. The Vex swarm had conquered 100 worlds, but they had never fought humans before. They were learning to regret that. The Vex Queen had been located. Commander Tae-yoon stared at the tactical display showing the massive heat signature deep inside the colony's geothermal power plant. Every Vex warrior on the planet was pulling back to defend it. That's where their command center is, the Council tactical officer said. If we eliminate the Queen, the entire swarm collapses. How many troops do we have available? Tae-yoon asked. Council Elite Forces number 2000. Your human forces number 400. Tae-yoon looked at the display. The geothermal plant was a fortress now. Vex warriors packed every entrance, every corridor, every ventilation shaft. Getting in would be a nightmare. Getting out might be impossible. We need everyone, he said. Combined assault. Council forces take the main entrance. My people will find another way in. The council officer looked uncomfortable. Commander, are you certain your forces can handle this? The elite troops are trained for exactly this type of operation. Your elite troops are trained to fight enemies that follow rules. Tae-yoon said. The Vex don't. My people are trained to adapt. There's a difference. 3 hours later, Lieutenant Una Park stood in the sewers beneath the geothermal plant with 50 soldiers. The smell was terrible. The heat was worse. But they were invisible here, which was all that mattered. Wuhan, can you get us through that wall? Specialist Wuhan studied the concrete barrier. Yes, but it'll be loud. Everyone in the plant will know we're here. That's fine. By the time they hear it, we'll already be inside. Above them, the Council's elite forces began their assault. They were magnificent to watch. Perfectly coordinated, shields glowing, energy weapons firing in precise patterns. They hit the main entrance like a golden hammer, and the Vex were ready. The elite troops walked into a kill box. Energy shields meant nothing when the enemy simply overwhelmed them with bodies. Sophisticated tactics meant nothing when the enemy was willing to die in waves. The elite forces stalled. Then they started dying. In the Council Command Center back on Sanctum Prime, Ambassador Hana Lee watched the battle feeds with growing horror. Vrextal stood beside her, his crystalline body dim with distress. The casualties, he whispered. 90% of the elite forces are gone. What about the humans? Hana asked. Vrextal pulled up a different feed. It showed Yuna's team emerging from the sewers inside the plant. They looked dirty and tired, but they were moving with purpose. They went through the sewers, Vrextal said, disbelief in his voice. They crawled through wastewater to avoid the defenses. Yes, Hana said. That's very human of them. Yuna's team moved through the plant's maintenance corridors. These passages were too small for the Vex's main forces, designed for engineers and repair crews. But they were perfect for humans who had spent centuries fighting in tight urban environments. Private Bin Choi led the point element. His squad had become experts at close-quarters combat over the past week. When they encountered Vex warriors in the narrow corridors, they used weapons that would have made the Council gasp. Combat knives, shaped charges, even their bare hands when necessary. Contact front. Bin called out. 3 Vex warriors blocked the corridor ahead. In the narrow space, there was no room for fancy tactics. Bin threw a flashbang grenade, a simple device that the Council would call primitive. The Vex's enhanced vision was temporarily blinded. His squad rushed forward, firing at point-blank range. Brutal, effective, human. Sergeant Yun Na followed behind with the support element. She found wounded Vex warriors and made a decision that would later be discussed in council chambers for years. She treated their wounds. Sergeant, those are the enemy, one of her soldiers said. They're also wounded, Yun Na replied, sealing a Vex warrior's bleeding limb. We're medics. This is what we do. The Vex warrior looked at her with compound eyes that showed something that might have been confusion. In all their wars, no enemy had ever helped their wounded. It was not the hive way. Deeper in the plant, Captain Jin Quan brought the Indomitable down to dangerous altitude. He couldn't fit his ship inside the building, but he could park it right outside and provide fire support. Sir, the Council is ordering us to pull back, his communications officer reported. The elite forces are in full retreat. We're supposed to abandon the assault. Jin looked at the tactical display. Tae-yoon was inside the plant. Yuna's team was inside. 400 humans fighting toward the Queen while the Council's best troops fled. No, Jin said simply. We hold position. If they retreat, someone needs to cover them. If they advance, someone needs to support them. We hold. The Indomitable took fire from Vex positions. Her shields flared and failed. Damage alarms screamed. Jin's crew worked frantically to keep the ship in the air. Shields gone, sir. Hull breaches on decks 3 through 5. Keep firing, Jin ordered. Our people are down there. In the deepest part of the geothermal plant, Tai Yun found the Queen. She was massive, easily the size of a shuttlecraft, surrounded by hundreds of warrior drones. His tactical implant ran through thousands of simulations, pulling data from every major human military engagement in history. The result was always the same: success rate below 15%. He smiled. Those were better odds than the Greeks had at Thermopylae. All teams. Execute Protocol Hail Mary, he said into his radio. Protocol Hail Mary. A last resort tactic that every human military force in history had used at least once. It meant we're going to try something desperate and we'll probably die, but we might win. So let's do it anyway. Wuhan placed his last charges around the chamber's support columns. Yuna's snipers took positions on the catwalks above. Bin's squad prepared to assault directly. Yuna readied her medical supplies because this was going to get ugly. On my mark, Tae-Yun said. 3, 2, 1 mark. The chamber exploded into chaos. Wuhan's charges collapsed part of the ceiling, crushing dozens of Vex warriors. Yuna's snipers eliminated the Queen's personal guards with precise headshots. Bin's squad charged through the gap in her defenses. The Queen screamed, a sound that made the entire plant shake. Her remaining warriors swarmed forward. The humans were outnumbered 10 to 1. They fought anyway. Tae-Yun moved through the battle like he had been born to it. Every tactic he used came from human history. A flanking maneuver from Alexander the Great, a feint from Sun Tzu, a desperate charge from the Light Brigade at Balaclava. The tactics shouldn't work together. They were from different centuries, different continents, different philosophies of warfare. But Tae-Yun made them work because that's what humans did. They took whatever worked and used it regardless of where it came from. Private Bin Choi found himself face to face with the Queen. His rifle was empty. His knife was gone. He was wounded and exhausted. By all rights, he should retreat. Instead, he picked up a piece of debris and threw it at the Queen's eye cluster. The massive creature flinched. Sergeant Yun Na used that moment to fire a rocket into the Queen's thorax. The Queen fell, and with her fall, every Vex warrior on the planet stopped moving. The swarm's hive mind collapsed. The battle was over. Tae-Yun stood in the wreckage of the chamber. Of the 400 humans who entered the plant, only 240 walked out. 60% casualties. The Council would call it a disaster. Humans called it a victory. Outside, Jin's Indomitable finally had to pull back. The ship was barely holding together, but she had covered the retreat, saved hundreds of lives, and proved that human ships could take punishment that would destroy anything else. In the Council chambers, Rextall watched the final battle footage in silence. Around him, other Council members sat equally quiet. They had watched humans fight with primitive weapons. They had watched humans take terrible casualties. They had watched humans win anyway. Finally, Rextall spoke. Bring up their military history file. The file appeared, still labeled Cultural Fiction and Historical Drama. Move it, Rextall said quietly. Move it all to historical record, verified, every single entry. An aide hesitated. Sir, that's 10,000 years of warfare. Thousands of battles. The documentation alone is real, Rextall interrupted. All of it. They weren't telling us stories. They were showing us their scars. He looked at the footage of Bin throwing debris at a creature 10 times his size, and we filed it under fiction. Ancestors forgive us, we treated their history as entertainment. Ambassador Hana stood at the back of the chamber. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. On Helios 7, medics treated the wounded, both human and alien. The Vex warrior that Sergeant Yun Na had saved sat in a medical tent, its hive connection severed but its individual consciousness emerging. It looked at the humans moving among the wounded, helping friend and foe alike. Why did you save me? It asked Yun Na in halting words, newly learning individual speech. Yun Na looked at the creature that had tried to kill her hours before. Because that's what humans do. We fight like demons, but we heal like angels. Someone very wise said that once, a long time ago. The Vex warrior was silent. Then, in a voice filled with something that might have been wonder, it said, "Your species is terrifying and magnificent." "Yes," Yuna agreed. "We are." 1 month after the Battle of Helios 7, the Galactic Council gathered for a memorial service. The Great Chamber was different now. Where before it had been filled with light and color, now it was draped in shadows. 10,000 names glowed on the memorial wall, Council elite forces, human soldiers, and civilians from a dozen species. Commander Tai Yun stood in his dress uniform, his left arm in a sling. Beside him, Ambassador Hana Lee wore black. They watched as alien delegates filed past the wall, each one pausing to honor the dead. Council Overseer Vrexthal approached them. His crystalline body was dimmer than before, as if the battle had taken some of his light. "Commander Tae-Yoon, Ambassador Hana Lee." He stopped before them and did something remarkable. He bowed. A gesture his species reserved for equals and superiors, never for inferiors. "I owe you an apology," Vrexthal said. His voice, usually so confident, wavered. "The Council owes humanity an apology. We reviewed your military history. We thought it was fiction. We were wrong." Hana said nothing, letting him continue. "We have spent the past month analyzing every battle in your database. 10,000 years of warfare, thousands of conflicts, millions of tactical engagements." Vrexthal's light flickered. "It's all real. Every tactic we saw you use at Helios 7 you had used before, against each other. You spent 10 millennia perfecting the art of war because you had to, and we filed it under entertainment." "Yes," Hana said simply. "You did. I watched your private Bin Choi throw debris at the Vex Queen when his weapons failed. I thought it was desperate madness. Then I found the historical record. Battle of Thermopylae, Battle of the Alamo. Last stands have a name in your culture because you've done them so many times." Tae-Yoon nodded. "We're good at last stands. We've had a lot of practice. Your Lieutenant Yuna Park's urban tactics. I found them in your records from battles in Stalingrad, Fallujah, Seoul. Centuries of refinement." Vrexthal looked directly at them. "You weren't improvising at Helios 7. You were executing doctrine." "Yes," Tae-Yoon confirmed. "Human doctrine. Written in blood across 10,000 years." Vrexthal was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The Council wishes to offer humanity full membership. Effective immediately. No probationary period. No restrictions." Hana raised an eyebrow. And we wish to offer you positions in the Council military command. We need you to teach us. Teach us how to fight like you do. Teach us how to win like you do. You want us to teach you to be barbaric?" Tae-Yoon asked, a slight smile on his face. "No," Vrexthal said seriously. "We want you to teach us to survive. There's a difference." That afternoon, the Council held an emergency session. Every delegate was present, even those who had to connect via hologram from distant systems. Ambassador Hana stood at the central podium where she had stood a month ago, asking for membership. "Humanity accepts the Council's offer of membership," she began. "But we have conditions." Murmurs ran through the chamber. "Conditions from the applicant? First, our military records will be made available to all Council species. Not as entertainment, as education. Free access. Every battle. Every tactic. Every lesson we learned." Hana's voice was firm. "We paid for that knowledge with millions of lives. We'll share it so you don't have to pay the same price." Vrexthal stood. "Agreed. Second, human military advisors will be embedded with Council forces. Not to command, but to teach. Our way of war is different. It needs to be understood, not just copied." "Agreed. Third, when the next battle comes, and it will come, humans fight on the front lines. Not as support, not as logistics, as equals. As warriors." "Agreed," Vrexthal said. And around the chamber, every delegate signaled their agreement. Hana looked around the vast room. "You thought we were telling stories. We were showing you scars. Every tactic, every strategy, every desperate gamble. We learned it because we had no choice. We fought each other for 10,000 years and we got very good at it." She paused. "Be grateful we're on your side now." The chamber erupted. Not in mockery this time, in applause. 3 weeks later, Private Bin Choi, now Sergeant Bin Choi, stood in front of a classroom of alien cadets. They looked at him with expressions ranging from fear to awe. He was human after all, the species that fought like demons. Today we're going to talk about small unit tactics, Bin said, feeling awkward. He was a soldier, not a teacher. But Commander Tae-yoon had personally asked him to do this. A cadet raised what might have been a hand. Sergeant, is it true you charged a Vex Queen with no weapons? I had a piece of concrete, Bin corrected. That counts as a weapon, but surely you knew you would die. Bin thought about that moment in the geothermal plant. The fear, the exhaustion, the certainty that he wouldn't survive. Yes, he said. I knew. Then why did you do it? Because someone had to. And because that's what humans do. When there's no good option, we pick the least bad one and commit to it completely. He pulled up a holographic display showing the Battle of Thermopylae. Let me tell you about 300 Spartans who held off an army of thousands. In another part of the council station, Lieutenant Una Park trained a mixed unit of humans and aliens in urban warfare. She had them crawling through mock sewers, breaching walls, fighting in confined spaces. An alien soldier approached her after the exercise. Lieutenant, the council's doctrine says we should never enter sewers. They're unsanitary and tactically disadvantageous. And yet that's how we reach the Vex Queen, Una said. Sometimes the book is wrong. Sometimes you have to adapt. But how do we know when to follow doctrine and when to break it? Una smiled. That's the hard part. That's what we've spent 10,000 years learning. And now we're going to teach you. It won't be pretty. It won't be civilized. But it will keep you alive. On the bridge of the Indomitable, now repaired and upgraded with Council technology, Captain Jin Kwan met with Council engineers. They wanted to understand how his ship had survived damage that should have destroyed it. Your vessel's design is inefficient, one engineer said. Multiple redundant systems. Thick armor instead of shields. Why, Jin smiled. Because shields fail. We learned that lesson fighting each other. So we built ships that could take a beating and keep fighting. Not elegant. Not sophisticated, but effective. The Council's ships are more advanced, the engineer insisted. Yes, Jin agreed. But when your advanced ship's shields go down, what happens? You retreat. When our shields go down, we keep fighting. We built our ships to our philosophy. You can't kill what refuses to die. The engineer was quiet for a moment. We have much to learn from you. Yes, Jin said, you do. But here's the good news, we're willing to teach. Months passed. Human military doctrine spread through the Council forces like wildfire. Some species adapted it well. Others struggled with the aggressive, chaotic nature of human warfare. But all of them learned. The galaxy learned that war wasn't about following rules. War was about winning. And humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of winning. 5 years later, Commander Tae-yoon, now Council General Tae-yoon, stood in a briefing room filled with officers from a dozen species. They were planning a defense against a new threat, using tactics that would have been unthinkable before Helios 7th. We'll hit them from multiple directions, a Luminar officer said, pointing at the display. Small teams, no formations. Just like the humans taught us. An officer from the Serpentis cluster added, and we'll use their own infrastructure against them. Set traps. Make them fight on our terms. Tae-yoon listened with satisfaction. They were learning. The galaxy was learning to fight the human way. After the briefing, Ambassador Hana found him in his office. She had gray in her hair now and lines around her eyes. Do you ever think about that first council meeting? She asked. Every day, Tae-yoon said. When they called our history fiction. Does it still bother you? He thought about it. No, they didn't understand. How could they? They'd never had to fight the way we fought. They'd never had to learn the lessons we learned. He looked out the window at the council station, now heavily armed with human-designed weapons. But they understand now. What changed their minds? We did, by bleeding, by winning, by refusing to quit. Tae-yoon smiled. We showed them that our stories weren't myths. They were scars, and scars don't lie. Somewhere on Earth in a military academy, young soldiers studied the Battle of Helios 7th. They learned about Sergeant Bin's charge, about Lieutenant Yuna's tactics, about Captain Jin's refusal to retreat, about Commander Tae-yoon's desperate gamble. They learned that these weren't stories. They were history. Real people. Real sacrifices. Real victories. And somewhere in the galaxy, alien cadets studied those same battles. They learned that the humans who seemed primitive were actually the most experienced warriors in known space. They learned that 10,000 years of human warfare had created a species that refused to lose. Most importantly, They learned to be grateful that humanity was on their side, because the galaxy had learned a simple truth. You can call human history fiction if you want. You can dismiss their tactics as barbaric. You can laugh at their primitive weapons. But when the shooting starts, you want humans on your side because humans don't lose. Not when it matters. Not when it counts. They'd spent 10,000 years making sure of that. And now, finally, the galaxy understood.